And welcome back. We are going to go ahead and get started with a new mode. Up to this point, we've largely been working in something called object mode, which we have seen. We messed around with the shape. We've been able to resize. But now we're going to use something called edit mode. So we can go ahead and start manipulating these polygon boxes into different shapes. So if we go over to edit mode, you'll see that we have our shape get selected. But you'll also see we have a bunch of new options here along our tool. Now I can also press the tab key here to kind of go in and out if I need to, but the easiest way is sometimes just, again, you have your menu here. But again, tab key should help you switch between those. And we, again, are in edit mode. So let's go ahead and get ready to start manipulating. We have a ton of options really to kind of dive in here to see what we want to do with this. Now, the very first thing we're going to notice, if I zoom in a little bit here, we of course have vertices, we have edges, and we have faces of this cube. And if we look up here in our edit mode, you'll see we have corresponding buttons up here. So we have one here for select mode of vertex, and we have one here for our select mode for our edges, and we have one for our faces. And we can click each of these to toggle between them, and you'll see how that kind of changes the selection option. Or I can hold down the shift key to select more than one, or I can even select all three. And the advantage of that is it kind of goes into like a smart mode. So if I click on a face, you'll select a face. If I click on a edge here, it will select an edge. It will select a vertex. So it is kind of a nice mode here, especially when we're working with something like this. However, sometimes if we get something that's much more complex, where we have a bunch of different angles and faces and stuff like that, we may want to toggle this down so we don't have as much control. But this is the level of granularity that Blender is going to give us to really help dive in here and get the shape that we want. Now, just to see this in action a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and just select this face that's right here. And I'm going to press the S key so I can scale. And you can see as I move this, you can see I can start creating different shapes here. So I'm just going to go ahead and let's just scale this down. And I'm just going to click. And if we rotate this, you can see we have a totally new shape here that we didn't have available to us before. That's pretty cool that we can now have the ability to create different objects that aren't simply just going to be one shape or another. All right, I'm just going to go ahead and just undo this real quick here because we maybe want to take this back to our normal shape. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to press the A key here and select all these. And what I will actually want to do is go ahead to resize this whole thing. I want to scale this whole thing here because I want to show you something, how it's going to affect our transform. So if I have that transform window up here and I open this up, right now, of course, you can see we have these different values in here. But what I want to do is to scale this. And you can see as I start scaling this, it will move. And let's just say I do it by a factor of 3. You can see it gets really huge. Oh, that's maybe a little too huge. So let's just back that up there. Let's go a factor of 2. There we go. Looks good. And I'll zoom out just a little bit. So here is our cube now with this factor of 2. And if I go ahead and I want to look at these values here, all right? Let's just change this back to object mode for a second. One of the things you'll notice is that our scale, even though I resized it by 2, is now set to still 1. All right. So we actually have everything still here at a scale value of 1. And this is very important as we start getting into other features and functionalities with Blender where we're going to need to do different things like materials and rendering and whatnot. This scale is still set to 1, even though we resize it, which means that this shape is now natively at a size of 1 for scaling. Even though we change the size of the cube, the scaling of the cube is still set to 1. All right, and let's just go ahead and just back this back down to a normal size. So Control Z here till we get back to our original size. There we go. And let's say we want to get this onto the ground, because up to this point we've been kind of estimating, we've been kind of taking a best guess. So if we look at our X plane here for a second, all right, we of course have our different planes of view here. We have Z, we have Y, all great. But we go to our X plane here, and of course this is where our light source is. That's our camera right there. So we want this to be where we can cross through this plane of origin. We can of course go ahead and press a series of keys to kind of really push this up, because if you look, we have a grid here that's kind of affecting this, and so we want to scale this so it's going to move, goes up that Z-axis, so that when we actually have this in place, it's going to be something that we can say, hey, it's sitting on top of this plane here. All right, so let's get ready to move this cube up and above everything. So I just want to make sure this cube is selected. So I want to make sure I select everything here, every little vertex and everything like that. And then once that's selected, I'm just going to go ahead and press Z, Z, and 1. And you can see if I click off this, I have a corner that didn't get selected here. So I'm just going to Control Z real quick here. And what I want to do is make sure that I have everything selected. So if I press A, that should select everything. And let's go ahead and press that combination again, GZ1, click off, and you can see now this cube is up. So it's very important that we make sure we grab every piece of this. But if you remember, we have a unit of 1 here, and so this allowed this cube to move up 1 unit above this plane and axis. All right, so now we can start transforming this now that it's on the ground, because it doesn't do any good to have something floating halfway through something. And so maybe I want to, for example, bring this edge out. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on that edge there, and I can then go ahead and transform that. So let's say I want to move it in the X direction. We have that ability there, so let's just press G and then X, and you'll see that we can now move this in the X direction, so that allows us to bend and manipulate this into a different kind of shape. And we got some crazy action going on here, so let's Control Z, and we may have more than one side selected, so I'm just going to make sure I have just that piece there, and let's go ahead and do G again, and let's press Y just so you can see how this would work. And you can see this is now bending outwards like this. We can bend it sideways. We have a couple different options that we have available to us. And so that's looking pretty cool there. If I Control Z this, maybe I want to bring it down. So let's just press G and then let's do Y again. And you can see how this starts coming out. And if we want to maybe manipulate it to create, like, let's say a wedge. And so we have almost like an upside down wedge here right now. But what's if I wanted to take this and make it almost like a ramp? All right. So this is, of course, a nice little wedge, but what's if a ramp? We wanted maybe a character to walk up this and go into, like, let's say, a building. So I want you to go ahead. I'm going to show you in a minute, but I'm going to pause the video. Go ahead and see if you can figure out how to manipulate this on your own, and then we'll go through it together. All right, so we have our shape here. We want to go ahead and still bring this down. So we, of course, can press Z, and we're using our G axis here. So again, we're selecting this. So let's press G and then Z because we want to move this in the Z axis. And we're going to do -2, and you can see it brings it right down. So if I type -2 on my keyboard, you'll see how it snaps it right down. And let's click to hold that in shape. That's looking pretty good. Now we can see, of course, that this is over this plane here. So if we wanted to move this over, we can. The easiest way to do that, I'm just going to press A. And using the G shortcut again, let's go ahead now, and since we want this to move along the green there, we want that to move up. But we have a up and down plane, if you will. I don't want to actually move that. So we have this up and down plane, which of course is the X here. And so I'm going to press G, I'm going to press X, and I want to actually move that 1 unit. So I'm going to do -1. And you can see that that has now moved that in this direction. All right, that's looking good. And if we do the same thing, let's do G and Y. And if we say, let's move that about a +1 and click off, you can see we have now put it right here into this quadrant right here. And that is a pretty nice way. So we learned some new things here. We're using some shortcuts. So G is really handy. And then obviously X, Y, and Z allows us to control the values of which axis we want to manipulate. We allowed ourselves to get into the edit mode and control these different values. And of course, we're using the keyboard to type right in numerical values so we can get a lot more precise rather than simply just making a best guess.